This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with the whole show available on our YouTube channel all of the time. On the show today, we talk to some medical practitioners who have volunteered for a relief mission to the Gaza Strip, where the humanitarian crisis seems to be escalating. And we get updates from the Farlam as well as the Suriti Commissions of Inquiry. Tensions still running high on the Gaza Strip and death toll expected to rise even further. One cannot begin to understand the physical and emotional trauma civilians must be going through there. South African humanitarian organisation Gift to the Givers announced last week that they will be sending medical volunteers for an emergency medical mission to Gaza. Around 75 medical practitioners volunteered within 3 hours, with the dangers involved not being an issue, it seems. Today, we're joined by two of those medical practitioners who will be joining the team, Dr. Yaqub Esak and Dr. Asad Borat. Very good morning to you and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Okay. Dr. Esak, if I can start with you, more than 200 people already killed, the death toll still climbing. How does that make you feel right now?
Obviously, it gives you a very hollow feeling in the stomach, and it's a feeling of despair. We'd like to see the end in sight, but obviously we've had this kind of scenario before when we've had to go to Gaza, and this conflict is obviously an ongoing one. But for us, obviously, we have to attend to those that have been injured and bring in our humanitarian angle as we best can to try and provide relief to those that are suffering to the best of our capabilities.
Dr. Borat, without politicizing the matter, I wanted to ask you, last night the Israeli Defense Force spokesperson accused Palestinians of self-genocide. Has this conflict lost all reason in a way?
Yeah, I think from our point of view, we don't want to look at the politics of the situation. So in all countries that we've been to, we've divorced ourselves from the politics. And I think it's very important that we look at the humanitarian aspect. And that's what we're going there for, is actually to help and assist people who are in need. The politics is complicated. In other countries that we've been to, like Syria, very complicated political story. The idea is to go there and to assist those innocent people who are caught in the middle of this conflict.
Have you got any experience of working in these kinds of conflict zones? And if you do, just both of you, give us the experience that you've made.
Yes, we've been in various conflict zones over the years, and the most recent one being obviously Syria, and 3 years ago in Somalia. So we have experience in going to conflict zones. We usually work with people on the ground. We try and provide some kind of security and ensure that our volunteers will be as safe as possible. But the volunteers also know the risk that they're taking. And we've never actually had a decrease in volunteers because of security or safety risks. In this particular instance, the issue is not so much the security, but more the accessibility of getting into Gaza, which is a serious problem because the Rafah border is closed and some doctors had to already leave. So what we're intending to do, obviously, is try and set up a hospital at the border and try and get our volunteers in there. And obviously very specialized teams specific to the type of trauma and injuries that we'll encounter.
I've been fortunate enough to have been involved in quite a few of the missions. We've been to the Congo, Somalia, the Philippines recently, following the typhoon, and Syria, as well as Gaza in 2009. And each mission has its own peculiar, demands on and challenges that we face as a team. But the interesting thing is, it hasn't, as Yaqub says, for this mission we have over 100 now people, South African medically trained people volunteering to participate in this mission. And obviously there are challenges and sometimes a risk to life. But we're not going in there to lose South African people. We're going in there to assist. The intention is good, and we obviously would minimize the risk as much as possible. One of the challenges with Gaza is what we had in 2009 was the Rafah border.
Yeah.
And we had to wait in that instance 48 hours to get through the border. And we believe now this week that the Rafah border has been closed, which makes it very difficult then for us to plan. That's one of the issues in terms of the conflict, is that people cannot move out of the area. So they can't move away from the war and from being a victim of casualty as part of the war.
That makes it very difficult. I wanted to ask you on a sort of personal level with your the threat. We see reports of bombs falling all over, bombs falling on beaches, on hospitals, on homes in the streets and so forth. How do you deal with that risk? And there is a legitimate risk to your life when you are there. If I can start with you.
As I said, the interesting thing about South Africans is that they come from a very diverse population, and we've come to a history in this country that hasn't been that non-interesting, if you want to put it that way. And that's built South Africans to a degree that strengthens them and strengthens the resolve. And I think when South Africans go into these environments, they actually thrive because they can deal with the levels of stress, the levels of change, the level of challenge that you have. And it's not something that you put on the top of your list as it's a risk to my life type of situation. You actually, you come back from an experience like this feeling enriched. That when you've met people that have been through the war, literally, but who show resolve and resilience that we've shown in our past, and it ties us together. So it's a very positive experience for doctors that come on these missions, in fact, that it's the risk to life is actually not something that's top of your mind, if I put it that way.
Well, on every trip, I mean, whoever volunteers, they know the risk. And we've had seasoned people that have come with us, volunteers, and then the new ones. And we kind of specify the risk from the onset. We also have debriefing sessions before departure, at the airport, and ongoing. And even en route, even if you have to stop somewhere, Dr. Suleiman will always give them the debriefing and quite clearly mention that anybody who wants to go home at any particular point in time is welcome to do so if they feel that the risk is too high for themselves personally. And generally, we haven't had many incidents except for some junior people, but we've also have within ourselves experienced volunteer group and a core group where we do debriefings every day, and they can come and see us at night or during the time whenever they're having some kind of difficulties. But the risk, all volunteers know that there will always be some sort of risk. And when they leave, those that depart understand the risk that they're taking.
Your family, what is their reaction when you say, I'll be leaving to go to Gaza to go and help those in need? What's the response?
Well, I think it's every instance is different. I mean, we went to the Philippines, it was less of a risk. But Syria, for example, was quite challenging for the family. And often what they do, they're very encouraging. My wife says to me, I mean, she understands that I need to go, and very supportive of me in that regard. What she tends not to do is look at news reports, because that becomes more of a stress than a help. But we communicate daily, we communicate often with the team. The communication with their family is very important, that they do it twice a day, morning and evening, let them know that things are going well. But you need to have a supportive environment if you're going to undertake these kind of missions, and luckily a core group has that. It's very important.
What's your expectation then once you get there, say the rest of the week?
Well, the first expectation is obviously we will still have difficulties. So even if we've been given clearance verbally by the Egyptian authorities that we'll be able to go in, there's no absolute guarantee that you'll get in the first place. And being part of the core team, we'll have to make sure that we can coordinate and keep the team going because there may be a bit of a wait. Gaza is always a very special trip. You require a lot of patience. And that will be the first thing. So there will be obviously obstruction along the way. There may be lots of issues coming along to say, look, you're going to modify your trip. You have to change your plan. And then obviously once we are in, we have people on the ground. We work on the needs and the demands of the expectations from the hospital staff that we're dealing with. And then we adjust ourselves to that. But we also have a very well-prepared team, and we take equipment with us. So again, it's a very well-coordinated effort, and our expectation is generally that of nothing is cast in stone, but whatever the general things that are happening will always happen.
Just give us a little insight into the specialization of your team and how many nurses, doctors, surgeons, and so forth will be traveling with, and what you'll be doing.
Yeah, what we do firstly is assess the need. So Dr. Suleiman would, for example, receive feedback in terms of what's required, because every mission is different. And we'll get feedback that, we need neurosurgeons, or we need orthopedic surgeons, trauma surgeons in specific examples. Then we'd crystallize the team along those guidelines. So we try to take a team that can work on its own, so that we can go into a hospital or into a building, set up a hospital. And so we need logistics people, we have nurses, we have trauma people, we have orthopedic surgeons, highly specialized people, anesthetists, and that they can run a field hospital on its own. Because we've got the equipment to do that. And often that's what we need to do, because it's sometimes more difficult to integrate into a system that's running. It takes you longer, whereas setting up a field hospital, you can get going much quicker.
Yeah, we've got a modus operandi and standard operating procedures that we fine-tune at each time. So like Asad is saying, we know that this is our starting point and this is where we're heading to. And the core team will always be there. So we'll make sure that the first team that always goes, sometimes we have to do a mission that's going on for 2-3 months. We have to get backup teams. But we have to ensure that the core team, the experienced doctors that have been there or personnel will always be with. And again, coordination with the people on the ground is very, very important.
Emotionally, how difficult is it? We see pictures of young children being blown apart, being injured, legs off, arms off, that sort of thing. How difficult is it emotionally to deal with this kind of scenario once you're in the field?
It is quite difficult. So it's often there where we find that certain people in the team would battle more than others, especially the less experienced people. But South Africans, as I said, tend to be more resilient than other people in dealing with these kind of traumatic instances. But I think what helps is having a team that relies on each other, can depend on each other, that work together, create an atmosphere that's conducive to working together. The debriefing session is very important. And if you have a good team, which we often tend to have, then it makes it much easier to deal with. And it's sometimes very difficult because but it's what we train to do. It's trained to assist people with severe injuries.
Look, we have like a runner all the time, somebody like myself or somebody that's more experienced, going out checking each particular spot of service where the doctors are involved, checking on their emotional status, asking them their needs. So the needs are not always physical in terms of equipment and medicines, but there's also emotional needs, psychological needs. We had an incident in Syria where a young boy was shot by his own father, and it was a hugely traumatic event, not only for the father, but for the entire team. They were devastated. So we actually stopped working for about an hour, gave everybody a bit of a break, did another debriefing, saw who had a greater need, take people on the side. So we do group sessions and individual sessions on an ongoing basis all the time. And again, we keep mentioning these things to the team as we're going, while we're there, and also when we come back, we do another post-trauma counseling in preparation for the future.
What kind of support do you have once you arrive there? Is there an advanced team, or do you have support from the locals? Just tell us, how do you integrate once you get to that area?
Many instances we have advanced teams. In this particular instance, we have partners on the ground, somebody that has been with us and knows the modus operandi and how we're working. So they're already there, and then there are obviously existing doctors in Gaza. They're very experienced because they're going through this kind of thing all the time. So the integration will be obviously a bit simpler because it's not a new event. And thus we'll be able to integrate, we'll meet them before we go in. And that makes it a bit easier.
You just give us a sort of schedule when you'll be leaving, how long you expect to stay and so forth.
So what's happened at the moment is the humanitarian effort has begun. So Dr. Imtiaz has sent through medical supplies, food, etc., sourced both within Gaza and from Egypt. We at the moment on standby. The difficulty is we've discovered this week that the Rafah border is closed to all people. No one going in, no one going out. So that makes it incredibly difficult for us to plan. So we're on standby. We have the whole team on standby, equipment ready at the warehouse. So it really now depends on the logistics in terms of entry into Gaza. If that's not possible, then we're asking the Egyptian government, which Dr. Suleiman is again busy with, speaking to the Egyptian government to get permission to set up a field hospital at the Rafah border. If we're allowed to see patients coming across. That might work because we can have international teams using the same facility coming and assisting, and then it takes away the problem of entry into Gaza, to Gaza through Rafah.
Finally, Dr. Essek, this is a very expensive mission. Where does the funding come from? And then in your personal capacity, who looks after your practice while you're away?
Generally, most doctors' practice is run by their locums, or they close their theatre lists, and they take the expense. That particular expense is incurred by the volunteer. And that's been always the case. In terms of the funding for the trip and the logistics, it's public funded. Individuals with 1 cent to 2 cents to corporates with hundreds of thousands of rands. And it's from all walks of life. We're getting it from all religions, sectors, races, corporate world, individual. And that's the fund that we always do. But we always pay up front and the money will come in later because people see the need and the visuals are there. And it's the South African community has always opened up their pockets and their hearts. It's been an ongoing thing, and we really appreciate the donations and the sponsorships that we get.
Well, Doctor, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's going to be a very interesting development over the next couple of weeks, and let's hope that you'll be able to get through the board and be able to do the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Newsroom will be back after a short commercial break. Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. The Arms Procurement Commission will today enter the second phase of its hearings, with mostly so-called whistleblowers testifying. This after concluding its first phase on Friday with the testimony of former President Thabo Mbeki. The second phase will deal with allegations of fraud and corruption into the 1999 controversial multi-billion rand arms deal. Last week, proceedings at the inquiry reached a climax and emotions ran very high as the former state president Thabo Mbeki and Paul Hoffman, representing anti-arms deal campaigner Terry Crawford Brown, were involved in, some say, nasty skirmishes. Mbeki was president when the arms deal was finalised and deputy when the acquisition was planned. He insisted that the cabinet's decisions to acquire arms were within the requirements of the constitution. The proceedings resumes this morning and whistleblowers are expected to testify, starting with Richard Young, a losing bidder in the arms procurement process. Now, SABC reporter Njanji Chake is standing by to give us an update. Good morning, Njanji.
Good morning, Eben.
Njanji, we saw fireworks last week. The heat was really on. Just give us a quick recap on your views on what happened last week.
Yes, even last week we saw the former President Thabo Mbeki taking the stand. After submitting that 4-page statement, he didn't deviate a lot at all from what the previous officials had testified throughout those few weeks. We heard him saying that the acquisition of those arms was rational. We also heard him on Friday saying that the arms deal or the acquisition of those arms was also Nelson Mandela's arms acquisition, meaning that even the late former president, he did know about the acquisition of those arms. It became very emotional and heated when Advocate Paul Hoffman pressed the former president for more information. We later learned that he became too emotional because he said he had lost his daughter to suicide. At one stage, the former president saying that Advocate Hoffman was talking down on them. He did not like his line of questioning, even when he referred to some of the former government ministers as minions. So today is going to go a notch up as we start seeing those whistleblowers, activists, as well as arms deal critics coming through to testify. First on the stand today will be Dr. Richard Young, one of the losing bidders in that combat suits contract, Eben.
Before we carry on to today and talking about the expectation, I want to go back to what happened last week with former President Mbeki. In the media, it was widely reported that President was somewhat protected by Judge Sariti. What are your views on this?
You know, Eben, I've been covering this hearing since day one, and then what I noticed about the public hearings on Thursday and Friday is that those questions that we, on previous occasions, were not allowed or overruled or objected to. What we saw with those 2 days with the former president taking the stand is that most of those questions that were not allowed to be asked previously did come through here at the hearing. You'll recall that Advocate Paul Hoffman spent most of Thursday cross-examining the former president, and then on Friday morning we saw Lawyers for Human Rights continuing with that cross-examination. So all I can say is that even though there were sporadic objections, but most of the questions that were previously rejected or overruled, we saw them coming through as the former president. He could answer some of them. Some of them he said he didn't know, he was not involved in that. He was the president, even though he was the chairperson of the interministerial committee. He was not really involved with everything, and he even challenged everyone to provide proof in terms of allegations of bribery. He said that as far as he knows, members of the interministerial committee, none of them accepted or took a bribe. We even saw the former president going as far as giving us a definition of what constitutes a bribe and what is a commission. He said commissions are standard business practice. If someone is appointed a consultant, they will be paid a commission. That commission is due to them. They will be paid a commission. A commission becomes a bribe if the money exchanges hands, especially with a decision maker, or if a commission ends up in the hands of a decision maker, meaning people who were involved with the awarding or deciding in terms of who will be the winning bidder or the preferred bidder.
And what are the views on former President Thabo Mbeki's performance on the stand last week?
There were mixed views. If you look at social media, some were saying that he's very defensive, some were alleging he's very evasive, whilst others were saying he's a very tough person to cross-examine. As you know, it's very rare in a country to see a former head of state coming through to testify. The last time we saw, I mean, if you look at the Truth Commission, previously there are people that were subpoenaed. They did not even come through to testify. But what is different about this commission is that we are seeing a former head of state that was subpoenaed, and he says that he came here voluntarily and he came to give the information. He came to assist the commission in terms of the information that they require in order to make certain findings before they can compile that report to President Jacob Zuma. So I can say that since the commission started, really, the highlight was to hear that testimony by the former President Thabo Mbeki. Even though at certain stages he appeared very irritated, if I can use that term, with the line of questioning of Advocate Paul Hoffman, because Hoffman was really asking any question that came to mind, as well basing his information and on stuff that has been lifted from the internet, stuff that has been lifted from books that have been written about the arms deal. Here we're talking about books that have been written by people like Andrew Feinstein, Paul Holden as well as Henny van Vuren. So it was quite interesting to see even those former government ministers coming to support the former president. We saw the former finance minister, Trevor Manuel, the former director general in the presidency, Reverend Frank Chikane, the former defense minister, Musiwa Lukota, was also here, as well as the former trade and industry, as well at the time public enterprises minister, Alec Ewin was here. His wife, Mrs. Zanele Mbeki, was also here. It was really a very important hearing Thursday and Friday with the former president giving testimony even.
Njanju, thank you very much for joining us today. We've run out of time, unfortunately.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Now, the Farlam Commission of Inquiry is also not short of drama at the moment, as the focus once again falls on Mr. X. Police witness accused the AMCU president, Joseph Matunjwa, of being responsible for the confrontation between police officers and striking Marikana miners that left 34 people dead. His testimony was interrupted as Advocate Dali Mpofu brought to the attention of Ian Farlam that widows of those killed at Marikana could not be part of the proceedings to hear the circumstances that led to their husbands' deaths. The commission resumes this morning, and AMCU legal representatives are expected to cross-examine Mr. X. Now, for the latest, we go to our reporter, Nozintombi Mia, who is there. Good morning, Nozintombi.
Good morning, Evan.
Firstly, Mr. X, with his hair-raising testimony accusing the AMCU president, just give us a little insight on that, please.
Well, Mr. X certainly hasn't been short of any interesting or hair-raising testimony. You will remember that the bulk of his testimony last week, he came out with two major points. The first point was that he felt that his life was in danger, as he believed that there were people who had gone to his family home and expressed to his family that his life was in danger. That was one of the big major things that ended up causing security here at this particular commission to be stepped up even further amid security concerns over Mr. X's safety. The other big point that came out of Mr. X's testimony was that heartfelt apology, it seemed to some, when he apologized on behalf of himself for the murders that were committed by the Makarapa miners who were on the Kopi. You'll remember those Makarapa miners killed 6 people, 2 lawmen security guards, 2 police officers, and by all accounts 2 other miners that happened to be going to work. So he's certainly not been short of any interesting testimony, and we're expecting further testimony that comes out of Mr. X. He does seem to have a problem when it comes to cross-examination, because he doesn't seem to be able to keep his story straight when he gets pressed for further details.
He also described how the security guards pleaded for mercy before protesting mine workers killed them. Will that also not be crucial information then that will be put forward?
Well, I certainly think that almost all the people that were killed by the Makarapas pled for mercy. And it certainly wasn't the only one person that had pleaded for mercy. But you will remember that those Makarapas on the mountain were not budging. They wanted that 12,500 rand increase, and they were willing to do anything, whatever it took for them to get it. And we saw, obviously, they went and they secured the services of a Sangoma who would give them muti that would strengthen them or make them invisible to police bullets. But it has been a very harrowing account of how they were killed. One of the lawmen security guards, Hassan Fundi, he was one of the the security guards that were killed, and his lower jaw was hacked off and certain parts of his face was hacked off so that the miners could then make muti out of his particular body parts. And that has been such a difficult testimony for his wife to deal with. And it's not just her that's dealing with it, it's the widowers of not just the 6 people who were killed by the Makarapas, but also the widowers of the 34 miners who were killed by police. It's been absolutely difficult for them to hear the graphic details of how their loved ones were killed. And Mr. X does seem to be taking out all this particular information on how, when and where it was done. But one of the biggest points that Advocate Ndumisa seems to be pressing on him is that his testimony doesn't seem to have any factual basis. It doesn't seem to have any corroboration aside from some of the post-mortem reports. But even those post-mortem reports don't accurately reflect whatever it is that Mr. X has been saying. And he's been accused of tailoring his evidence to suit whatever it was that the police had decided was going to be their defense line. And you'll remember that the police defended their actions and they said that they were shooting in self-defense. Now, it does seem as though Mr. X's evidence seems to fit in the police's timeline of how events happened, of who were some of the people that were on the copy, how it was that some of them, the 6 people were killed, how they died, and what police intervention was put in place. But only time will tell during the course of this week whether or not Mr. X really is honest in his evidence and his testimony, or whether it was all a big ploy to corroborate whatever it was that the police's line was.
And Tommy, just tell us, how long do you expect Mr. X still to be on the stand, and then who is to follow?
Well, Mr. X has proven to himself to be a very unreliable and spotty witness in terms of sitting throughout a session of the particular commission proceedings. So we are anticipating that his cross-examination by AMCU, by Lonmin, and by the lawyers of the injured miners, we're expecting that his testimony will last through the better part of this particular week. And you will remember that once Mr. X has concluded his testimony, it will then be the opportunity of Lonmin to give their case and to bring up their witnesses. At the moment, we still have no details yet on who it is that Lonmin will be calling up, but we'll certainly be keeping you updated as soon as we find out. But that will most likely be closer to Thursday or Friday when we do find out from Lonmin who are some of the witnesses that they are expecting on the stand, how long they're expecting to have their case, and how many witnesses they are anticipating on the stand. What we do know is that there's still at least 20 more witnesses overall that still need to be cross-examined or still need to give their testimony here. So it does seem as though the clock really is ticking on this particular Farlam Commission. 20 people before the 30th of September. It does seem very dicey they'll be able to conclude with those 20 people.
And Tommy, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That is Nozintombi Mia coming to you live from the Farlam Commission of Inquiry. Now, that's where we wrap it today. Thank you for watching. Newsroom is broadcast every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. from our studios here in Johannesburg, South Africa. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also live on YouTube at that time with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. From our side, say a very good morning to you. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.
Good morning and welcome to our Monday edition of A View from the House, coming to you live from the National Legislature in Cape Town. My name is Asanda Mbeche. It's a